All right, we should be live, good to go now. It's meetings being live streamed, perfect. So really excited to be doing another one of these on Monday night this week. It's March break. A lot of you guys know because I've talked about it a fair amount, but I'm a teacher, so got a little bit of not free time right now, but a little more time to do some live clinics. And the defensive guys following me, I've taken some flack because it's three really good offensive focused live streams this week. Starting with our guest tonight, Coach Kamau Peterson, who's doing some really cool stuff in the content space as well with Athletic Paradigm. If you're like me and you're kind of new to TikTok but follow Canadian football stuff or football stuff in general, it's like one of the number one things I've been watching recently. And Coach was with us last year too when we did a receiver panel. So thanks again for being on here, Coach, and really excited to kind of talk about getting off press coverage tonight. But before we do that, if you want to just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you're doing now online in terms of the athlete development side of things as well, that'd be awesome.
Sure, thanks. I'm Kamau Peterson. I was fortunate enough to play for 11 years as a professional in both the CFL and NFL, but primarily made my bones in the CFL. Won a Grey Cup, several-time All-Star, was a Most Outstanding Canadian in 2008, and was fortunate enough as an American playing in Canada as a national player, was able to really be embraced by the country and have since been kind of on a mission to give back to this country's young football players in particular, just kind of feeling like I owe the game. So spent some time in the public space coaching at York University, as well as on the junior national team, was able to win a couple gold medals there on the national team and help York get to some respectability for a time there. And now I'm back in the private space with Athletic Paradigm, training both local and national. Actually, with the ability of getting online now, I've been able to expand my reach quite a bit, which has been nice. But I'm based out here in Toronto and training athletes from middle school all the way up to the pros, and helping guys transition to find scholarships, to get pro contracts, to extend their pro contracts, and really focusing a lot on the skill players, receivers and defensive backs, but also the speed development and strength and the nutrition. We're kind of a one-stop shop around here. So, but I appreciate the opportunity. Honestly, tell your defensive guys, you want to throw a tidbit at them, tell them they should be paying attention to these offensive Zooms as much as anybody, because if you really want to study and get places, you need to understand what the offense is trying to do to attack you. So that's one of the main points I make with my receivers when I'm teaching them in these film room sessions is, I'm on the other side teaching the defensive backs how you're trying to beat them. So you should understand how they're trying to play you.
Muted myself there because I got the dog in the background running around. But yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things I found that's been one of the cooler things over COVID is I've had more time to kind of bounce around and you always want to know what the other side's doing, but you obviously have your own indie drills to sharpen up on and your own best practices to keep, learning and developing. And the game doesn't stand still, schematically as well. So I think it's been not, now that we're able to, move on from that a bit and, seasons are coming back and people are doing a little bit more actual on field. And, I coach in the OSFL, which will be back for the first season really of it in that branding this summer. So I feel like I've had kind of 2 years of, maybe almost like an online internship, like just bouncing around, talking to different people. And it's been amazing, for a guy that played offensive line and you're so kind of often siloed into that world. It's been cool to, to be on, whether it's just different positions offensively or full on being on different sides of the ball. So it's great. It happens to be 3 offensive guys this week, but, lots to learn either way. And I think one thing that I've always been interested in looking at receiver play is offensive. And again, from an offensive line context, people can be in different alignments, but the guys can be off the ball, on the ball, different stances and stuff like that. But it's pretty consistent. Like within the first 3 steps, I'm going to make contact with someone, and that's how the rep is going to play out 99% of the time. When you're running routes, like you may have a post route or an in route or whatever it is, but you may end up in, a myriad of different situations based on the DB's leverage, the depth of the defensive back, who's actually covering you based on the route you're running, if it's not a man concept, there's so much there that I think is really interesting and creates a lot of nuance. Like one of my best friends at school is a receiver and he's coached with me. He's coaching out at St. Mary's now, actually, as their receivers coach. And just talking to him about like the amount of, subtle coaching points and how things change based on, okay, are you going to run this route versus inside leverage versus outside leverage, or are they playing off, or are they playing press? Are they playing man? If they're pressed, are they bailing? Like, there's so many things. And I find, especially with indie, an indie period might be 15 minutes. You want to be really targeted with the advice you're giving athletes and how to handle those different situations. For you, when you're talking about a basic, situation where you're getting press coverage, and let's just say it's a guy that's on the line of scrimmage, and we kind of were talking before whether we want to talk American rules or Canadian rules, and I think we're going to go with a little bit of both, which is a really cool perspective to have. Starting with that kind of stagnant, American football situation where, you're not guaranteed that yard, and, you're probably not moving at the snap of the ball. What are the basic fundamentals you want to see from your players, if they're in that situation, they're trying to run a route against press coverage?
Well, the biggest thing, and I work with guys, like I said, from middle school all the way up. And there's one consistent thing that hits everybody. And I find that a lot of receivers genuinely don't look at the defender that's opposite them, truly look at them. They look past them. And that's the first thing you got to change, because this is literally the only person that can stop you from getting to the route in the time frame that you need to get there. And if you're not looking at him, or at least parts of him, then it's going to be a huge challenge for you, because if you're looking past him, he's definitely looking at you. You can guarantee that if he's pressing and is truly playing man, he's watching your hips, or he's watching your chest or pad level. And I find a lot of receivers look past the DB. So first thing we do is work on eye discipline. And then the second thing we do is we work on coordinating the hands and feet together, especially in American ball. Without that yard, if your hands can't work in conjunction with your feet. So a lot of guys are athletic and just have great footwork. Maybe they came from basketball or soccer or whatever. They've got great footwork and they feel like they can out dance everybody. They can kind of just raise up and chatter their feet and get around. The challenge you're going to find is, unless you're in a great program that's got an amazing offensive line, quarterback doesn't have that much time to throw at any level of football. So you've got to get to your depth in a spot where you can be reached in a short amount of time. You're talking 3.5, 4 seconds on a good team. And I haven't been on many of those. So I was working on getting open earlier than that. And the thing I always tell receivers is, I don't care how open you think you are. If the quarterback's not ready to throw when you're open, or if you're open prior to that or after that, you're not open. You have to be open at the right time in order to genuinely consider yourself open. So those are the two main things: finding your eye discipline. And for my guys, what I teach them to look at is the wrist. You're watching the wrist, whether you're, when we get to Canadian ball, I'll talk about it even more, but right off the bat, you've got to be watching the wrist of the releasing side that you're trying to get out to. And now understanding which side you need to release to is a battle that I think people make harder than it is. And I think the biggest thing is understanding that any route can be run from any release. And that's a challenge that I think a lot of coaches don't necessarily, I don't know if they don't subscribe to it or they don't understand how to teach it, with very few exceptions. The only exception I can think of is a slant, like a true slant route. You're going to have to release inside to do that. You're going to have to win inside. But other than that, you can outside or inside release any other route if you understand how to work the high side mechanics, and we can get to that later if we need to. But those are the two biggest things I would say is your eye discipline and finding a way to teach the coordination between your hand work and your footwork, so that those two systems work, those two muscle groups work in unison. You've got most kids will be able to work their feet and their hands will be delayed, or maybe they've got some sort of boxing or martial arts background and their hands are great, but their feet maybe don't pair. So having that not be disjointed, you find a lot of athletes where it's a bit of a disconnect, almost like a separation. I tell them you have to marry the two. You can't be separated or divorced in those two muscle groups. They've got to be working together at the same time. And that takes a lot of reps and practice with it. But those are the two main keys for especially American ball. Without that yard of cushion, those two things got to be working.
Yeah, I think the one point that I've heard a lot of coaches that I've been with as well, they talk about the importance of that wrist. And for me, it translates back, from an offensive line standpoint. Like, I find when defensive linemen are using their hands, if they get me in the wrist, it's a lot more effective than if they bang into my forearm, even 4 inches lower. It's amazing that in a game between, you might have 200-pound players, squaring off, and those 3 inches between, the wrist and the middle of that forearm makes such a difference in, like you said, being able to coordinate that movement of their hands and then match what you're trying to do with their feet. I know for sure in my high school coaching, experience and summer rep football coaching experience, I guess would be a little more accurate than just high school. So many of my guys, when they get pressed, I've never thought about it that way, but you're right. They're looking past that first target,
Yeah.
right? They're thinking about, oh, I've got a 10-yard dig, and their mind is 10 yards down the field, not, hey, I've got to win this. I'm going to use this release strategy, or I'm going to use this piece of handwork to get into where I need to go.
Yeah.
And as you get against better and better players, I was lucky when I was at Laurier. We've had a lot of good boundary corners, so I've seen some pretty good high level, press coverage. A lot of those guys like Godfrey Onyeka comes to mind playing in the CFL right now. And
Yeah.
even when I was playing there, a guy named Felix Odom was really, really good player playing corner, and he played a ton of press. And I think the thing that I always have found that helps guys is when they're able to have that strategy, pre-snap and use it. How much of that, like, are you teaching, like, okay, you're going to use this specific strategy, or how much would you consider like letting guys almost like feel it out and see which one they need to use? Like, I guess I kind of liken it to like a pass rush. Like, how much are
It's
you
exactly like a pass rush.
going in with a move, or how much are you like reacting to that, to the way that the defender's playing you in the moment?
Okay, so no, you've made a good point. Like, it's exactly like a pass rush. Like, the relationship between receiver and defensive back is conversely identical to defensive linemen, specifically defensive ends and offensive tackles. Like, if you put the DB in the tackle spot, it's the exact same. It's the same theories and techniques essentially in the D line and the D ends. I can teach D ends exactly the same as I can teach receivers without having to worry about if they can catch or not, because at the point of attack, it's almost identical. What I teach is I'll give them tool sets. So I'll give them a set of releases. We'll work those releases ad nauseum to the point where it overtakes their previous release package. Because oftentimes, especially in today's day and age where there's so much online, kids will be working things that they don't need or have no idea when to use. So what I try to do is I give them 3 or 4 basic releases that will work versus any press technique, so long as they're able to have the eye discipline and hand-eye coordination to actually find that wrist or find that forearm. And I'll teach them a few different hand releases as well. I'll kind of wipe out the release techniques that I don't teach. For example, like the swim move, I don't teach because it exposes the whole rib cage. So I'll teach a swipe and punch, which kind of minimizes your strike point for your defender. It, gives them nothing to hit, and will kind of undo some of the bad habits in that regard, so that when they do set up and line up, whatever technique they're using is going to work so long as they execute it correctly, right? If you give them too many release moves, it's very difficult at the beginner levels to try to decipher which one to use in the real time. And I'm finding this out more and more. The more I'm doing, I've been doing this 25 years. Now I'm working with more pros than I ever have, and realizing a lot of pros don't understand coverage to the level you would think. And which makes you wonder, what do the college guys know? What do the high school guys know? So unpacking that backwards, you can't expect them to be able to figure out which release to use by understanding what coverage they're facing. They're going to have to figure it out in real time. So giving them tools that are going to work versus any coverage or any technique, so long as they do these 3 things. And I've got a checklist that we go off of, that they pretty much, they can go back to when they're looking at their own film. If and I got a bunch of guys that send me film, and I'll help them kind of correct that. But that's the biggest thing is yes, you have to have a plan, but it can't be such an extensive plan that you're crippled by it. If you think that you're going to outside release with this double stick and he jumps outside, you better have a counter to every plan. And that's the biggest thing. Well, if I give you 3 release tools, you're going to have 4 counters for those 3 release tools, just in case, you get a lunge technique or you get a press bail or whatever it is, so that you're not sitting there stuck while your quarterback's tapping the ball waiting for you, because that's a surefire way to get your production reduced.
I think the key point you'll highlight there is like having, specific moves with counters. So like, what would be like the first move that you would teach? I know you mentioned you don't teach the swim, and if there's any D-line coaches on here, they're probably like, yes, overused, doesn't work as well as people think. Nice. It's funny when I first started coaching in high school, the move that our D-line coach totally outlawed was like nobody spins until yeah, if I approve the spin for you,
Yeah.
it's kind of like shooting threes when you're younger, growing up playing basketball. I guess now the kids wouldn't even know that. Back in the day, I wasn't allowed to shoot threes. I guess everybody shoots threes now. I didn't have the
Stuff
green
changing.
light. Yeah, yeah. Now it's like, well, did you play basketball though? But you weren't allowed to shoot. It's like, same thing. But not having the green light to use that spin move. So many high school guys are like, oh, like it's my best move. It's like, yeah, but when you take a step up in competition and the other guy has some technical proficiency and some strength
Yeah.
and some, abilities, and even when you just get to the senior high school level, right? All of a sudden you've got to be that much more targeted with what you do. So when you talked about, focusing on the wrist and making sure that mentally you're where you're attacking that press coverage first before you get into your route. And you mentioned having a few different moves with a few counters off of those. What would be your base? Like if you could start with one
Yeah.
for high school players, what would that move be if you could break that down?
First one I would teach. I always teach again. I build my guys from the ground up, regardless of position, and that starts with your footwork. So the first footwork that I teach is called, I call a set, which is just a 2 foot coming to balance at the same time. So if you picture your back foot coming to balance with your front foot and hitting the ground at the same time, now I have power off both sides. Okay. And there's a distance you want to be. You want to be, no more than 2 yards away from your defender when you hit that set. But it'll also work in close contact so long as your hands are ready to go. The other thing is not popping up when you do that set. You'll see that taught quite a bit. I'm not reinventing the wheel by teaching that, but what I teach that might be a bit different is not rising up and showing your chest when you do any of these footwork actions. So everything I teach is coming forward at a low trajectory, because anytime you have to change direction, you're going to have to drop your center of gravity anyway. If I was to ask these guys to run a 40, none of them would pop straight up. And any speed coach would tell you that you want to stay as low as you can, as low as your body, your body trajectory will allow. It's no different in route running. And if I have to raise up, I'm just giving an indicator and exposing myself to the defensive back. If we're pressed, now I'm exposing immediately, where I'm literally giving him a boxing target. And that's one of the analogies I'll do. I'll put on the gloves with my guys early in the first couple of days and just see what I can get, see what I can get target wise on whatever they're showing. And I can swing a lot quicker than they can see my wrist. So they end up getting pelted quite a bit. And the analogy I'll use for them is, if this was a fight, if it wasn't football, you'd be a lot more concerned about where your targets are. And you need to have that mindset. You need to protect your targets that can potentially, if they get hit, slow your route progression. If you hide those, and if you watch the hands that could potentially slow you down and are able to swipe those, nothing will ever get in your way. And you don't have to be particularly quick to do it. You have to be quick enough in terms of hand-eye, but your feet don't have to be particularly quick to get off a press. And it doesn't even have to be great press. And I didn't realize that until I got to the NFL and had to deal with guys like Champ Bailey in preseason. And, you talk about quick and still have, like you said, technical proficiency, but the fact that I was able to still move these guys and get them where I wanted to. And it's part of that speaks back to my time in I was able to go to CFL first before I went to the NFL. And the CFL is actually the more physical league on the edges, because at least at that time when I played, they could hit you all the way down the field without any flags at all. Now they still get away with quite a bit of that, but they'll flag you a little bit if it gets excessive. Post Brandon Browner, they've started to kind of call that a little bit more, but it's still more physical than over there. They're calling that pretty tight over there, and those refs get paid quite a bit to do that, and they don't miss much. So understanding that, if I don't have anything to target and I can see where your hands are coming from, I should be able to win every time, as long as it's on my priority list. The problem is when it gets off your priority list, you're going to be just trying to running for a Sunday stroll and get hit off your stem.
Yeah, I think that's such a great way to think about it, right? And it's kind of, again, I liken it back, like you're saying, to pass rush. And when you're able to take right away before you even get into the handwork, right? Like it's a lot easier if that guy doesn't get a clean hook into you for you to be effective with your handwork, as opposed to, hey, that guy got a real meaningful, O-line coaches all the time talk about like first meaningful touch, like who gets their hands on who first. And, if you take that strike surface away, I think that that's, something that I think a lot of guys right off the bat before you get to anything else would change a lot of, their ability to handle that stuff. Once you kind of, if that's your fastball, what are you kind of doing to counter off that? Or like, what would you even see from the DB that would get you to use that counter? Because that's one thing guys all the time, I'll see them do 4 or 5, and again, more so pass rush stuff in this case. But guys will get using 3 or 4 different moves, and I'll be like, well, why did you you were striking them out with your fastball? Like, just
Right.
keep throwing the fastball.
Yeah. Well,
So what would
but
you
even
see that would cause that you would want to use a counter, and then what would be your counter off of that?
I always so I'm always going to give you a package of 3. So like if we work, that set release for a week, the next week we'll work a rocker step, the next week we'll work a double and then a triple. And then you've got kind of a base package to go with. And then we start talking about when to use each. But unlike the baseball analogy where it's like if they're, if they're not hitting your fastball, they can't hit your fastball, why are you throwing anything else? At some point, and I'd imagine it's probably like that with baseball too, you'll lose velocity on that fastball and it'll make you more susceptible to be hit. Yeah. Football is no difference. Like, as fast as, you could be a 4.2 guy, they'll still be able to measure that speed at some point. You might get them a couple of times. They're going to back off and be able to sight and see how you're moving and play you at that speed, so long as you don't vary that speed. So the variance of your speed and the variance of your footwork is important to throw different things just to see how they respond. But you're also testing and probing to see where their weaknesses are. Like part of our position as receivers is not being dictated to, right? You've got a defense who's trying to funnel you where they want you. And half the battle for us is to resist that within the confines of the offensive scheme and test theories and see where they're weakest. If you can exploit those weaknesses, that's where big plays happen, right? Because defenses are essentially designed to minimize those big plays. And if they can keep funneling you into these nickel and dimes, that's how they win games, right? But if we can exploit those weaknesses that they're trying to not let us access, that's where it gets interesting. So we're constantly probing that. And it's not a passive state, from the way I teach the position, it's very aggressive. It's not uncommon for me to have guys come off and shock release you. If you're going to press me, I'm taking it so personally. There's a good chance I'm going to come off and hit you in the mouth just to let you know it's not a game, right? It's a game, but it's not a game. And from there, now you've at least got that on your mind that it's a possibility. I could just run you over at any time. Now you're going to play it a bit differently. But at the very least, it can't just be the same release over and over and over again, just for the sake of keeping it interesting and finding out where your weaknesses lie.
For sure. So is there any general amount you would want? Like, obviously it's very situational, but so let's say you're getting a team that you're getting a lot of press. Like I'm thinking like a quarters team, like a US quarters team where the corners are carrying vertical routes to get into that quarters. So in the game plan, hey, I'm going to see a fair amount of this.
Yeah.
Would you suggest, hey, you want to early on, like give them 3 or 4 different looks early on, or you want to kind of almost feel them out as well and kind of go with your, top 2 moves, say really early on, and then get to the other ones as you go? Like, what would that, how would you approach that from a game plan standpoint for you as a receiver?
It's part of your release, like your release package partly depends on the route you're being asked to run. Okay. For example, like that set release is going to work much better for vertical routes deeper than 8-10 yards. It's not going to work as well for quick game slants, quick outs that don't convert, things that might be a locked out or something like that, or a little shallow cross. Those you're gonna do more doubles and triples so that you can constantly be inching up field and creating space, but also still allowing yourself to be able to get leverage at the point of attack. If he wants to play catch or squat on you, you may have to lift him off the spot and get to where you need to go. I'm talking about body position throws, like slants and shallow crosses and things that are real prevalent in like the West Coast offense, which is being used quite a bit on both sides of the border right now. But for deeper routes or your intermediate routes, your deep routes, that set release is going to be great for you. So what I would say is, depending on the route package that you're given as a receiver, right? Because we've all got our talents. We've all got, every receiver that's played knows there's certain routes a coach doesn't call for that guy. There's other routes that he calls for you ad nauseum, and we always, grass is always greener. We always want the routes that we don't get called for us, but understanding our route package is vital to understand what releases we should be using and utilizing. But the other thing too is the time of game. If I've got one that I know, I've warmed him up for a release, I'm saving that for the right moment. And you'll know when those moments are. You got a close game, third quarter, fourth quarter, you've hit him with a couple doubles in a set. Now it's time to hit him with that triple because he hasn't seen it, but you don't want to waste it. The other time we'll start to play with releases, I find, is in run game. That's a great time to test things that you don't really use. So that's when I tell guys to roll out all those Instagram releases and stuff that they find off of these, whatever they've seen their favorite receiver try that maybe they're not of the caliber to really do. Try those then against run game where you're just trying to get them off balance and get a piece of them, because that's really the ultimate thing you're trying to do. And it's tougher in the US game to get your defender off balance, but that's the primary goal. If we can get our defender off balance and be able to see still, like I said, have that eye discipline, still get his hands off, we're going to win that every time because we know where we're going. It's a lot easier in the Canadian game with the motion, obviously, but even then, most guys don't utilize that motion right in order to really access that. So it's definitely something that gets reinforced quite a bit. But knowing your route package is huge in terms of what am I being asked to run, and then the corresponding releases that should come from that, because some are just going to take too long. If I've got a post, like truly like a post, whether it be a high post or, a thin post or a safety release, like middle open post, either way, I got to get down the field. And if I'm sitting there messing around with this press release, I'm dead. And it's probably killing the scheme, because with a post typically has a dig in there, you got a bit of a high low somewhere. And if I can't get moving and access the middle of the field, the whole scheme's dead and we're going to check it down. So you can't really use every release for every time. They have their time and place. And half the battle is knowing which routes correspond with which releases.
For sure. And you talked about the 4, you already talked about the set. Obviously there's so much detail here. Like you could probably do a whole clinic on the rocker step and the different times that you want to use it. But in the more general context, for if people go and, because I find sometimes too on the internet, like I'll find a term I've never heard before, and I spend a lot of time trying to figure out what it means, and I realize, oh, it's just called something else. You know what I mean? But rocker step is one I've heard a lot. If you want to just in whatever detail you feel is most appropriate in this setting, what's the difference between your set release, your rocker step, and then you said your double and your triple? Like what are the general themes of those type of concepts? And then maybe we'll talk about some specific like Canadian game stuff that you can do with the movement we have up here.
Sure. Set release, I don't know. I haven't seen it called very many things outside of that. And I kind of just go off the names that coaches that taught it to me or mentors that taught it to me, what they call it. So I have seen rocker step called a bunch of different things. So I don't know that my term of rocker step is one that you're going to find, if you're looking for rocker step other places. But the way I use it, a rocker step, if you want to picture, it's almost like basketball where, I've got the ball and I show the ball to the baseline on a pivot foot and I pause and then take off on that side. That's essentially what it is. If you took the ball away and I step with my back foot outside to the outside toe of the defender, pause, allow my weight to transfer back just slightly without actually shifting weight. I'm talking about a very slight hesitation, then go. That's a rocker step as I teach it. Okay. So the counter to that would just be a straight single. Whereas if I show and he overcommits, I just cross over and go. Off of that same, I haven't changed my feet. I've only done one step, literally from my back foot has moved forward. I shift weight. As I start to shift weight, he extends and covers me and comes outside. I cross over him. He doesn't, he stays midline. I rock and go. Real simple counter. But again, the hand work has to be there. Otherwise you're still going to get pushed off stem. And then I'm looking to stack and straighten and get going. Right. But there's, it's a lot easier if I show it to you, but I'm hopefully that explanation helps it because like I said, I don't know that my term rocker step would be used. I've heard rocker step used for other things in other places. So I don't really know that'll hold weight, but that's how I teach it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Almost like that hesitation dribble in basketball, type of
It's
like you're
exactly what it is.
saying.
And it's the same physiological principle, right? Like it's the same.
Yeah.
You wonder how it, how do people go for that in basketball? It's almost like a pump fake, right? Like how do they keep going for it time and time again? Because you're naturally drawn to, if someone starts one way and then stops, you're initially brought in to that
Yeah.
stop. And it's just utilizing that. And then obviously it gets ridiculous when you start throwing motion into that, but off of a stationary like the US game, that's a timeless one that, guys like Amari Cooper are using, guys like CD Lamb, these guys use them to death and they work. So that's why they keep using them. Also, that set release is one that those two guys in particular use quite a bit. Devontae Adams has made a killing off of the set release. If you're trying to picture what I mean when I say that set release, Devontae Adams' main and go-to release is a set release. And then that rocker step tends to be his counter off of that. So, there's guys using it that you could easily access if you needed the video for it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And sometimes I think it's great. Like you can watch the video. Like I find there's so much video out there. Sometimes like hearing the coaching point to me is like just as important. Like I can find the video. Like I can probably too in half hour when we're done, go find like a clip of that and dub it over top of it. But sometimes I find, and maybe this is the O-line guy and me coming out again too, like it's one thing to see someone do it or someone to show it to you. It's another thing to like have that terminology. Hey, like what do you say to an athlete to try and create that movement pattern? Right. So I think
Right.
that's
Yeah.
valuable
No.
information
Well,
too.
the other thing too is it's a progression, right? Because not everybody's as coordinated as they think they are. And to see somebody, you lose track of how phenomenal these athletes are as you're sitting there watching them. You're like, that looks simple enough. Meanwhile, the guy he's doing it against is like 3-time All-American at
Yeah.
Alabama or something. He just left him, reaching for air. And
Yeah.
it's easy to lose sight of the caliber of player. And oftentimes there's a progression needed to try to build that into your toolbox legitimately, so that it's actually there, as opposed as something you can call upon, as opposed to something that's just you've tried it once and you think you can go back to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you mentioned the double and the triple. What are kind of like the key movement patterns there?
Okay, so doubles and triples are essentially like double sticks. If you picture somebody at the top of a route giving a stick and then coming back the other way on the other stick,
Yeah.
that's just a double. A triple would just be 3 of those, and a single would just be a general stick. Now, shrinking those down into a confined space, they become quicker, still have the same head and shoulder. But like I said, I teach it to happen lower. So you're not raising up to do it. A lot of guys will do doubles and triples, showing a lot of chest, kind of drawing the defender in and hoping that your double and triple makes them miss. And the challenge for that is if they're better than you. And that what I'm always teaching my guys is, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. You want to play at high levels. You need to prepare as if the guys in front of you are harder to beat than maybe they are, especially at the Canadian high school level. You've got a stud on every team who hasn't faced any competition his whole career to that point. And maybe won't until he gets to college, or won't until he goes and plays 7-on-7 somewhere or something. So understanding that there's better people waiting for you and teaching good technique, to the point where you can't do it wrong. I think that's probably the biggest key for us. What I do with Athletic Paradigm is just having a trained eye on you that's not going to allow you to raise up even that one time. We're going to force you back down so that when you do get to that pro level or that college camp or whatever it is, and you need to shine, that technique's going to be there for you, as opposed to just something that you've worked for a few times and hope to call upon.
Yeah, I think that's a huge difference. Like anyone that's played at a high level, it's that resonates, right? Like it's one thing to have done it. It's another thing to be able to use it in those key moments. And obviously when you get into a press situation, time and space, or you're short on both. And so it's not like you have, one step here or there becomes super relevant, or 6 inches in that pad level becomes, everything. So no, that's great points. And what I think for a lot of guys that I would coach, and I always, when I'm doing these videos, I'm always thinking about, hey, I'm going to make sure I save that point for so-and-so, or remember to say this to, to this DB or that DB or whatever position group I'm talking about. And in Cambridge, we're fortunate. We got a really good group of DBs this year, and we haven't done very much press. We haven't coached very much press, just because we've had guys that were more off type players. Something we'll probably do more this year. Flipping it the other way, and I'm putting you a bit on the spot here. If you're talking about a DB in press and who's now going against a way better receiver, what's like the number one thing you would say that those guys what technical mistake would that DB trying to play press make most often that would really only show up when they now play against the guy that's doing the things that you're talking about with pad level and having a plan, etc.
If you're going against one of my guys that plays with their hands and feet well, which is pretty rare at the high school level, the thing that's going to show up quick is if you jam with the wrong hand, right? If you shoot, and I find that gets taught at the high school level here a bit too much, is shoot with your hands, but they don't specify which hand. There is a right and wrong, jam hand, and understanding that's a big one, but also understanding where the differences is between you and that receiver. So say you've got a stud receiver you're up against and your coach has identified that. What makes him a stud? Is he fast? Is he a route runner? Is he an athletic playmaker, like good with the ball in the air? Because that should change how you play. If he's not, if you're a fast guy and he's not, you should be able to press him all day and just play him from inside out. If he is a guy who's a bit faster, and you maybe want to give him a bit of cushion, but maybe he doesn't catch the ball particularly well or like getting hit particularly well. We've all got something in our game receiver wise that we don't do very well. Finding that would be the key for anybody looking to play, a high level corner or especially a press corner. Those are the guys that the matchup becomes real fun. And I didn't start teaching defensive backs till probably 2 or 3 years ago. And for the longest time, it was simply a matter of, I wasn't sure how much I knew to be able to communicate the position. Then when I really started digging in, like playing, all my friends were DBs, and I studied the position so much because I was constantly trying to beat guys like Baron Miles and Corey Banks and like these guys that Dante Marsh and these guys that were just very good at what they did. Jordan Younger, these guys that were great corners in our league. And I realized, man, I know way more about that position than maybe any other except receiver, simply because I had to earn a living. Like I really studied it from an analytic standpoint. So now being able to recommunicate that is a real cool opportunity for me on both sides of the ball. And I'm having a good time with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I find, that the more I'm around more coaches, you'll see a guy who, is coaching a position and you just assume they played that position, and I like Steve Frakes, an example, is the receivers coach at Laurier. I had no idea he played DB and I know the guy he was coaching when I was there and he's actually back coaching there now. I saw a picture. I'm like, hey, why are you with all these defensive guys? He's like, oh, those are my roommates that play DB. Like I had no idea. And so you're right. Like when you become an expert in one, you can't become an expert in one side of it without, processing a ton of information about, how you're going to attack the opposite, position. So I think it's really valuable that way. I think to have, a guy like yourself working with younger athletes now and older ones as well, obviously in the pro game, but, especially for a young player that might be much closer to the floor of their ability because they've just gotten into it at a high level. Those type of insights are awesome. Anything that would not necessarily change, but other things you would add to your approach if you're now talking specifically in a Canadian context?
The biggest thing for the Canadian context, whether you're on the line or in motion, is the part that drives me crazy about young players. It's not their fault. They just don't know. Utilizing that motion to get your defender to actually shift. Okay. Understanding the defensive backs by design are great open field tacklers. That's what they do all day. They're defensive players. If they weren't good at it, they wouldn't be on the field. So you running directly at them is doing their job for them. So using your motion to get that defender to shift instead of staying here and running right at him, you get him to shift sideways, because no different than in basketball, it's very difficult to stay with someone when you have to move sideways. A, it burns staying low in that position. And B, once my center of gravity gets off, my footwork has to be impeccable in order if he stops and starts. And it really puts you in the driver's seat, whether you're coming in motion down the line and getting him to shift side to side with you, or you're coming in motion, like a running motion with like a waggle. Man, the biggest thing I can tell people is if you just can get him moving side to side, life gets so much easier. And from a coaching perspective, it's completely in your best interest to teach that heavily, because it'll mean you'll have to coach them less in terms of all the things we were talking about, getting the hands and feet working together. If you can just get him moving side to side, sometimes you stopping will send him out of the picture, and now you're open just by default. And that's one of the great things about the Canadian game that to me makes it just so fun from a skill perspective. Probably not so much, it wouldn't be as fun on the defensive side if I had to play that, but on offense, that's what kept me over here, even when opportunities were calling down south. I just, if it wasn't the right opportunity, I wasn't going, because I was having so much fun playing over here, to be honest. Like, it would really, from a receiver standpoint, it's really fun that way. Once you understand that, once you get him moving side to side, he's essentially at your mercy if you know what you're doing. But the first key is get him moving side to side. We're talking before you hit the line of scrimmage, before the ball is snapped. So as I'm hitting the line of scrimmage, he's now not in the same place. He is displaced from where he initially started. And so getting him and having a plan based on each route as to where to put him is vital.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. And I remember I was at Laurier when Curly Gittens was there. It was obviously, off to a great start with the Argos, and no surprise to any of us who know Curly. But he played as a freshman, and I think he might have just turned 18, but he was like really young and super talented, obviously, and loved the craft, still loves the craft. He did a presentation for my Cambridge Lions receivers, in the middle of February.
Nice.
On a Tuesday night, just, he had 30 plays in the cut up.
Nice.
He could have gone for 4 hours, just incredibly good guy off the field and talented guy on the field. And I remember him even at that age, really using that on the line of scrimmage, more than any of the other guys. And, we had a really good receivers coach at the time, who's the OC at Guelph now, Mark Soria. And I remember asking Mark, I'm like, hey, how much is that? You're talking to him. And he's like, yeah, it's just people are pressing him because he's really, really fast. And so if he is a younger guy, smaller guy, that was the strategy, right? Well, we got to get our hands on this guy. He probably doesn't have the built up, muscle memory and tools in the toolbox. But if we let this guy get running, we're going to have a problem. And to see him right away gravitate toward that strategy with a purpose, right? I'm trying to get, I'm playing with the leverage of the guy that I have. And, if I'm trying to get inside, where do I want to get him moving? Where do I want to start? How do I want to change my split, my initial alignment? But I remember definitively, even when he was really, really young, seeing that be a big part of his game. People didn't press him. We enjoyed for a few games briefly when that was the strategy that people were using with him. And we had him one-on-one for about 2 weeks, I think. And then the rest of his career, he was getting doubled. But
rightly so.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. That was it was funny. We went from our playbook was before Curly and after Curly, because before Curly we had some good receivers, but not a lot of guys that were one-on-one separators.
Yeah, huge problem.
And then immediately it was we got Brenton Hall the same year, who had a great career in the
great jump ball guy. Yeah.
Unreal. So we got those two guys in the same year. And it was a very stark change in the coverages we saw from, I'm trying to think what year that would have been, probably 2014, I think would have been his freshman year. So the coverages we saw in 2013, we got very different stuff in that following year. So that's great stuff, Coach. And like we kind of mentioned at the start, you're doing a lot of great stuff with Athletic Paradigm. Where can people find, if people like this, the level of detail, I think, is one of the things that separates your content apart. There's a lot of great stuff out there. But the level of detail, I've learned a lot just from listening to your stuff. So where can people find that? And, for anyone who's interested in, contacting you about the stuff you're doing at Athletic Paradigm, where can they do
Sure.
that?
I mean, athleticparadigm.com is, a great resource for coaches and athletes. We got stuff on there. We do team training, we do team consultations, virtual off season. We got a bunch of stuff on there, but also, for live sessions, if you're in the Toronto GTA, hit us up. But we, like you said, we recently got on TikTok and started, putting some content out on TikTok, on our Instagram under the same names. Not as much on Twitter yet. I'm still struggling trying to figure out how to work Twitter. And then we'll get in our YouTube channel, should be up and running here in the next month or so. And I'm going to be doing some deep dives and getting into some of these techniques. Cause like you said, it's so nuanced. I could literally go all day off of each of these releases. But you need the visuals and the discrepancy between the differential between, US ball and Canadian ball is another one. And I agree. Not enough people are talking about it from a Canadian ball standpoint. So I love what you guys are doing with that regard, and hopefully you guys keep going.
Yeah, no, for sure. We got no plans to stop. I'm trying to do as many This week we got 3 live streams, which is great and super fortunate. Tomorrow night, we've got Dub Maddox on, who I don't know if you've followed his work at all, but he's a really interesting guy. Put out a bunch of books. He runs this thing called the R4 system. If you're an offensive coach and you're watching this, just trust me. Tune in at 9 o'clock tomorrow.
Nice.
Google Dub Maddox tonight. You'll be really excited about it by tomorrow. I'm super excited. We had a huge reading his stuff has made a pretty big impact on me in terms of how I view offensive football. And then really, really excited. We're going to do a running backs clinic on Wednesday night. Running backs coach from Maine is coming on and talking about different drills based on different positions. But, like you said, it's cool. I think in Ontario and Canada in general, you have such a wide range, right? Like you were talking about, working with a clinic, going to the Colts, like that, that's a guy that played Ontario high school football.
Yep.
Right. That, then went to York University, had a great career there. Then he, gets in the CFL, carves out a great career for himself there. Now he's heading on down to the NFL. I think of some guys that are on my teams. I'm like, man, if you grew up, in 100 kilometers, south of where you are right now, right, the sky's the limit. And I think more and more Canadians are getting those opportunities, whether they're just more prepared for U Sport. I was having a conversation the other day about how much harder it is to win in U Sport now than it was when I got in like 6 or 7 years ago. Like the quality of all the athletes, I think, has improved, like in most sports, but I don't necessarily know if it gets the credit it deserves. Like to make a U Sport team now is that's not that it's ever been easy. It certainly hasn't.
Right.
But
It's
the quality
parity
of knowledge and athlete that's on the practice squad at an OUA school is far beyond where they were even when I was there. Right.
Agreed.
Which is not all that long ago. But more and more guys having opportunities to choose between, hey, do I want to go the OUA route? Are there opportunities for me down south? It's interesting to see like the football education in Canada. It's you have to learn our game. Right. Some guys are interested in going to the States and have that opportunity. That's a whole other game. There's so much to learn. Right. And a lot of those guys will end up back in Canada in the CFL, hopefully. And the quality of Canadian play there as well, I would say is, continuously getting better. So it's awesome to see.
Absolutely. No, it's a work in progress, but there's a lot of people doing a lot of good work, and hopefully we're all in it for the same thing, just trying to give kids the right opportunities and keep building the game, because that's the thing. It's such a great game. I just want to keep seeing it thrive, and I hate when it's threatened, and things like the pandemic limit youth sport and youth football registrations. And when I want to see those things thrive and keep growing. I'd love to see the CFL get, a little more involved at the grassroots level and just really build this game up, because it really is a unique game. And I think the country misses it that 1 year that it wasn't in. I really feel like, everybody missed something, and I'd love to see it just continue to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. I mean, I talk with guys all the time. I'm like, I would really see if the CFL game, when it's played really well, like the NFL could steal 4 or 5 of those rules and make it a better product. But that's a whole other episode. And I don't think, I certainly don't think I'll be involved in any of those changes long term. But it is a great game. It's a unique game, and I think with more, hopefully more resources coming out about it, guys will have more access to the information they need to keep improving it. So I'm going to take us off the live stream here. Thanks again for doing this. And it's been great to talk about, one specific skill, but like we said, if you're interested in whether it's Canadian football, development, or, looking at learning a bit about the American game as well, wherever you are on that spectrum of where you're coming from and what part of the game is important to you. I know Athletic Paradigm's got a lot of great stuff. So thanks again for doing this. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of those TikToks.
I appreciate it. We'll see you soon.